I came over from Serbia at the age of 13 with my mother. My older brother, who was 15 years older than me, had lived in America for a few years and had sent for us. My mom wouldn't be staying, although at the time I wasn't aware of that. We landed in New York City and the plan was my brother would come and get us. However, my niece decided to come early as my brother's wife went into labor shortly before we landed. My brother couldn't leave his wife, so he asked a coworker of his, they drove cabs, to pick us up in New York City and drive us to New Jersey where him and my sister-in-law lived. When we got to New York City, we waited in customs for what seemed like forever. We looked for my brother but didn't see him. This was in the early 90s and cell phones weren't as commonplace as they were now, and even if they were, my mom and I didn't have one. We panicked a bit not seeing my brother or my sister-in-law. Suddenly we heard our names being called and saw a tall man. He introduced himself in perfect Serbian and explained he was good friends of my brother's and then told us about the baby. He said he'd be driving us the 2 hours from the airport to my brother's home. My mom relaxed and they happily began to converse about the baby, my brother, and America. I, however, just felt off. This guy gave me bad vibes and regardless of my brother's friendship with him, I felt distrustful of him. We drove for a good hour and a half when he announced he was going to take us for breakfast. We hadn't eaten in over 15 hours, so we were starving by then. We pulled up to a house and my mom and I were confused. He insisted cheerfully his wife was cooking us breakfast and after we'd drive the rest of the way to the hospital to see my family. My mom shushed me when I whispered something didn't feel right and told me that we needed to be grateful for the hospitality. We were led up into the house. It was dark and dirty. Suddenly, I think my mom finally got a bit nervous and started insisting he take us to my brother. Out of nowhere, the guy grabbed my mom by the wrist and told her that he needed a wife to take care of him and his house, and when he heard my brother tell the others at work she'd be coming in to stay, he knew he'd found a wife. I, at the time, was a scrawny little scamp of a kid, and I tried pushing him off my mom, but he hit me so hard I saw stars. At this point, we are terrified. Neither of us spoke English, we only knew my brother's home number, and he was at the hospital. Also, in Serbia, you don't dial 911, so even if I could, I didn't know that's how I'd call the police. He tells my mom she's to clean and cook for him, and he takes me to the basement where I was locked in what I now know is called the laundry room. I banged and cried and yelled, but it was so far down in the basement, everything was muffled. For a week, we were kept in his house. He'd lock us in the basement after my mom cooked him breakfast, and he'd let us out when he'd come home at 4. If we had to use the restroom, there was a bathroom, but that was it. Just a bathroom and a laundry room. It was freezing cold there, and even us huddling together under a blanket did nothing. One morning I discovered a small window by climbing on some boxes. I managed to open it and my mother insisted I squeeze through it. I didn't want to leave her, and besides, how would I get help if I couldn't read nor speak the language? However, I didn't want to live this way the rest of my life, so I did as she asked. I ran once I got out and I'm sure I was a sight. A scrawny boy with no shoes, only wearing shorts and a t-shirt in the middle of November. However, that is what saved us, as several concerned neighbors tried to get me to come with them, and I wouldn't. I was terrified and I kept trying to get them to follow me. The police were called and a very nice policeman tried to get me to go into his car. Then I saw the man who'd taken us drive up in his taxi. He saw the cops and took off. That's when I made a run for his house to get my mom. Needless to say, the cop and his partner ran after me and my mom was rescued. It took another 4 hours for them to find someone who spoke our language for us to tell them what had happened. A warrant was issued for the man. My brother was contacted. His friend had told him that we had never showed up and my brother had been frantically calling back home in Serbia to find us. He drove up to get us and give the cops information on his supposed friend so they could find him. They never did find him. Back then, before 9/11, it was easy for someone to disappear. However, it made me distrustful for a long time of people and their intentions. My mom grew homesick and she ended up going back to Serbia. I stayed and finished school. I ended up becoming a cop in the military thanks to the nice officer that helped me all those years ago. I think of that guy who kept us prisoner every now and then, and honestly, I wouldn't mind meeting him now. I just don't think he'd want to meet me. My friend and I grew up in a sleepy wannabe New Jersey Central Florida town, and we were the outcasts. We had met in 6th grade when I overheard her talking to another classmate about bionicles, my 11-year-old self's passion. We became fast friends and soon were inseparable. Soon began the gauntlet of sleepovers, birthday parties, and family gatherings. We were practically siblings. She was the only person I'd come out to as bisexual, and in turn I was the only person she told about being trans. Her home life was tumultuous, though I can't say mine was any better. We often had a habit of taking refuge at each other's houses. Like I said, we became like siblings. Her father was an alcoholic, strict, and prone to physical discipline. Her sister was a stuck-up girl who had gravitated towards the hicks and jocks when we entered high school. And her mother was a pseudo-vegan hippie love child held over from the 80s. When I was 23, herself 22 at the time, we had another long night of sleeping over in order to let her escape yet another fight with her mother. She had recently lost her job at Walmart, and I was going in for my first shift at Taco Bell the next day. On our drive home the next morning, she excitedly told me that now that she has her own vehicle, she would be applying at pizza places that were in need of a driver. I was proud. It was the first time she'd hunted for a job on her own, as I'd usually been the one to coax her to apply when I was working. Not that she ever lasted very long. My first day of training goes quite well. My coworkers are friendly and try to get me to talk more. My manager likes to playfully embarrass me, a fat white guy, by trying to get me to talk hood to the other coworkers. Being a training day, it wasn't a very long shift, but I had been up early in anticipation as this had been my first day on a job in a few months. I got home at around noon, informed some of my internet friends that my first day went well, and around 5 p.m. I started to bed down, drained from a good day. As I'm preparing to lay in my bed, I get a Steam message. Her lamenting about another fight with her mother and asking if she could come over. Now, I had started to grow a bit weary of the fights on their end. I had begun to repair my relationship with my family and a few friends, and I had given her advice many times on how to better approach things. In my infinite wisdom and eagerness to sleep, I left the message on and drifted off into a slumber. Around 8 p.m., I am awakened to her bursting into my room in a panic. Having been ripped from a dream, I was groggy and disoriented. I dragged myself to my bathroom to relieve my bladder and made my way back to my room to find her rocking back and forth on my bed. It was at this time that I noticed she was covered in blood, so I asked what happened. She informs me that she saw someone murder her mother with a knife. My mind goes blank. In the deepest part of my mind, alarm bells start ringing. Isn't the rocking back and forth a little overdramatic? Why didn't she call the police? But this was my best friend. I've known her for over a decade, and we're the only two people in the world we could count on. I suppress it and go inform my sister and my stepfather. My mother had passed the year prior, and it was roughly a month to the anniversary of her death. We were all in a dark place, antisocial as always. It was the only way we knew how to handle emotional issues. When I inform my family, they immediately go to the same place I had, though they were far more vocal about it. I offer excuses I knew myself were flimsy and return to the room, phone in hand. I convince her to call the police, and I can hear her explaining the details over the phone. A man in a black ski mask. When the cops arrive, she swears up and down it's most likely her father. They send cars over to check on the crime scene and take her in for a statement. I ride with her in the back of the cop car over to the sheriff's office. It gets to be around 2 a.m. Her sister was brought in, as was her father. I have to work the next morning and request to be taken home by a police officer. It takes me a while to go to sleep that morning. The next day at work, I'm quiet. until my manager asks me what had happened. I informed him, but decided to work the rest of my training shift. When I get home, my sister informs me she had confessed. Her mother threatened to kick her out for not being able to find a job, and in a rage she had taken a kitchen knife and stabbed her repeatedly. My mind froze like a bad computer and I turned to face my monitor. I was in a Discord call at the time, and all I could weakly say is, my best friend confessed to murdering her mother, before hanging up and lying on my bed. Her last trial was the 7th of this month. I don't know the results, though my grandmother tells me she took a plea deal for life in prison rather than the death penalty. Part of me wants to contest that, to demand that they take the death penalty for ridding the earth of such a peaceful and caring woman's shadow. A larger part of me is just glad she's being punished. Natalie, you are my best friend, my sister, and my platonic soulmate. But please, let's never meet again. This story takes place during my senior year of high school when I still lived at home with my mom. It was a Saturday, so I slept in as any teenager does, and my mom left for work early that morning, so I had spent my day at home alone. I decided to do some cleaning around the house, and when I realized we were out of paper towels, I went down to the garage to get them since that's where we kept our extra things. My mom lives in a 3-story townhome where the main floor is on the 2nd floor and the 1st floor is just a small entryway at the bottom of the stairs and 2 doors. One is the front door and the other door leads to the garage. So I walked down the stairs and opened the door to the garage, going to flip on the lights, but I realized I didn't need to. The garage door was wide open and letting in a lot of daylight. Maybe to some this would be no big deal, but my mom lives in a not great part of town and is adamant about closing the garage door when she leaves. I remember feeling weird about it since it was so unusual, but chalked it up to my mom just not realizing it, or maybe something had rolled under the door so the automatic sensor kept it from closing completely and she drove away without realizing. I looked over into the dark corner of the garage where the boxes were stacked and the paper towels were stored. For some reason I couldn't get myself to walk over there and grab them. I do have a slight fear of the dark, so I figured that caused my sudden hesitation. I just stood there in the doorway and pressed the garage door button on the wall and watched it close completely. I made sure nothing blocked it from closing and waited a good 10 seconds before leaving to make sure it was shut all the way this time. I switched off the light and walked back inside and locked the door to the garage. I took maybe 2 steps up the stairs before I heard boxes tumbling, scuffling of feet, and the audible sound of someone hitting their hand against the garage door opener, and then the mechanical sound of the garage door opening. I noped it up the rest of the flight of stairs and just stood at the top step for probably 20 minutes just shaking. It wasn't until my mom got home and asked me why the garage door was left open that I went back down. Other than my mom's car now in the garage, it was completely empty except for the boxes in the corner where we stored extra things for the house. I looked and saw that the boxes were toppled over. I had to explain to my mom the situation. I'm so glad my gut told me not to go into the dark corner of my garage. A little context to this story. I grew up in a rural area, in a rural town, in a rural state in Brazil. A place can't be much more isolated than that. At 17, I left town to attend college, and I would eventually come back during summer break to visit my family. I'm a female-to-male trans guy. When I left town, I was a girl, and the next time I came back, I was a man. Being that this city was really just a small town where everyone knew everyone, I got quite a few odd looks for that, but it's nothing I wasn't used to be honest. This happened a few years ago when I was home for the holidays. My father worked for some nearby farms at the time, and we had a small farm of ours. He would leave for work before dawn and come back way after dusk. My mother passed away when I was little. My sister would come home for the holidays, but when this incident happened, she hadn't arrived yet, so I spent most hours alone at home. On this particular day, I woke up feeling a little ill. Nothing major, just a common cold. My dad, being the boomer he is not a fan of medicine, so there wasn't any in the house. I decided to wait for him to come back from work and ask him for a ride to a drugstore to buy some cold medicine. We lived roughly 15 kilometers from the town itself. At about 5 p.m., my father called me and told me he was going to be late for dinner due to a problem at work. Knowing that the only drugstore in town would close soon, I asked him if I could use his trail motorcycle to go there and buy some medication. He agreed, and there I went. My visit was uneventful. I bought some medicine, and since I was already there, I visited a few friends. At around 8 p.m., I decided to go back home. Again, this is a very isolated place. The road home was unpaved and pitch black dark as there was no street lighting, but I was used to it at this point. About 5 minutes into my ride home, I noticed there was a car behind me. As it's an isolated place, I thought it was my dad's car and he was going home, so I didn't pay much attention. A few minutes later, the car turned the high beams on. I was a little uneasy, but still I thought my dad was playing a prank on me. Then the car got closer and closer to a point where it was tailgating me. I tried to look in the rearview mirror to see if I could recognize the car, but because the high beams were on, I couldn't see a thing. All I could see was some intense lights following me. I decided it was safer to let whoever it was pass by me. I slowed down and pulled over a bit, and the car did the exact same thing. This is when I realized there was something seriously wrong. I accelerated as hard as I could and the car followed me. This is when someone in the passenger seat of the car rolled down the window and screamed, "Hey dude, I think we should have a little talk." Nopety nope. I knew better than that. To throw them off, I used a small gap between the fences of our family's property. It was enough for my motorcycle to go by, but not a car. I passed through and the car had no option other than to stop outside. I ran home, called my father, who later called the neighbor that lived a few minutes ahead to rescue me, and told him what was happening. He told me to grab his gun and hide in the barn. And that's what I did. At the barn, I had a good view of the car because the lights on the front porch of the house were faintly illuminating it. There I saw a gray hatchback that I had never seen before. Standing outside of the car were 3 men who gazed up at the pitch-black darkness, probably looking for me. I couldn't see more than shadows, but it was absolutely frightening. A few minutes passed and the car left. I'd never been so relieved in my life. Then my neighbor finally arrived at the scene. I described what had happened to him, and he told me that a son of a nearby farmer had some trouble with gang members because of drug money. He had received life threats from this gang and ran away a few weeks prior. What probably happened is the members of said gang were after him and had mistaken me for him. So if I would have stopped at that moment, I would have been executed at point-blank range. That's for sure. I was working as a garrison military police officer. It was Thursday at about 03:45, and I was watching a stop sign as people tend to run the sign during the night thinking it was late enough to avoid getting pulled over. As predicted, someone blew right through the stop sign. I pulled the car over, and for some reason, this stop gave me the chills. I walked slowly up to the car, my red and blue lights somewhat making it hard to see. As I walked up to the car, I touched the back taillight. This is in case they flee, we would have prints to ID the car. And I noticed the windows on the car were heavily tinted. I couldn't even see in using a flashlight. When I knocked on the driver's window, it rolled down maybe 2 or 3 inches, enough for me to see a pair of old eyes looking at me. I cleared my throat and asked her to roll the window down all the way. She looked at me, and her eyes kinda gave me a look that seemed inhuman. She began to laugh. All the while, she never took her eyes off of me. I tried to shake off the feeling of what the hell is this? I asked her again, to which she rolled the window down the rest of the way. She was red in the face and she asked me if I knew there was a full moon. Before I answered, I shined my flashlight into the car and didn't find anyone else inside. I asked her for the normal documents and she just looked at me and began laughing again. I opened her door and asked her to step out. By now I'm thinking she's drunk or high on something. Because I was alone, I told her she was being detained and I placed her in handcuffs. As I was walking back to my car with her to place her into the back, she screamed at me. She was calling for her baby. I hadn't seen a child, so I asked her where her child was. She told me the child was in the back seat. I put her in the back of the patrol car and told her that I was going to find her child. When the door shut, she began to let out an ungodly, ear-piercing scream. I looked in the back seat of her car and saw a green trash bag and decided to open it, which just about caused me to vomit. In the bag there was a cat's body with a large doll head attached to it. Immediately I called for EMS in case she was 5150 or mentally unsound, and I called for my sergeant as well. While I waited, I walked back to the patrol car to check on her. When I looked into the back of the car, she had slipped her hands out of her handcuffs and in her arms were the cat's head. She was petting it and calling it her baby. Eventually EMS and my sergeant arrived and I gave them the rundown. Long story short, this woman was schizophrenic who had failed to take her medications. This was one of the most creepy things I had ever dealt with. What is even worse is when she was wheeled into the ambulance, she swore she would find me. But she was never heard from again. My dad was a private person. It's almost 20 years to the day he died, and I could not tell you if he had any political leanings or how many girlfriends he had before he met my mother, or if he saw action while he served in the army. He was one of those quiet, duty-bound men that kept his thoughts to himself. When my dad was diagnosed with terminal brain cancer, he often had a hard time sleeping at night. Sometimes when I would wake up at 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning, I would find him out at the kitchen table drinking a cup of chamomile tea in hopes that it would soothe him enough that he could go to sleep. If I was not too tired, I would join him sometimes, and we would talk about whatever he was thinking about at that moment. He began to open up to me about his life. He talked about the cruel nuns that ran the Catholic school he attended. He disclosed that the reason he could never get through Full Metal Jacket is because he witnessed a blanket party while he was in the service. My dad also told me about some of the misadventures he experienced during his time as a police officer. Some of the more memorable moments of his career as a police officer included the time that he and his partner had to chase a homeless junkie on top of a moving train, which apparently is a lot harder than it looks in the movies. He told me about the time that it took 5 male officers to carry a drunk woman out of a bar. All of the officers, including himself, had been scratched or bitten by the woman, so they were all required to take an HIV test. He also told me about the time that he was giving a tour of a local jail to a group of school children, only to be interrupted midway through the tour by the desperate cries of a predator who had to be dragged out to solitary confinement. My dad and the group of children looked as the 3 guards carried the man down the hallway. The man soiled himself and he sobbed and begged not to be put in the cell with the other prisoners. I asked my dad if he ever encountered someone truly evil in his time as an officer. He told me about this incident. It was 1981. My dad and his partner Randy were working the late shift. It was a little after 11:30 p.m. when he got a call from dispatch. A man called in to report that he had just murdered his girlfriend. The location he was calling from was less than 15 minutes from where my dad and Randy were patrolling, so they responded to the incident. The murder took place in an area that had become depressed and crime-ridden after the local factories closed up one by one in the late 70s. Thus, my dad felt on edge as they drove through the neighborhood. Occasionally, he would see people come out of the shadows or out from behind buildings walking to wherever they were going, most likely to buy or sell drugs. The sadness of seeing a person in the otherwise dark and empty neighborhood had an eerie effect. When my dad and Randy arrived at the home where the murder took place, the first thing that they saw was the front door was wide open. They immediately wondered if the murderer reported his crime to dispatch, then took off before the police could arrive. My dad and Randy drew their guns and proceeded with caution towards the front door. Light from the living room was pouring out the door. As my dad got closer to the porch, he saw what he thought was a black dog calmly laying on the living room floor. Randy took the lead and made his way through the front door, his gun drawn as my dad covered from the side. Randy motioned for my dad to enter. When my dad stepped through the door, he realized that what he thought was a dog was actually the body of a woman lying face down in a pool of blood. To her left was a young red-headed man sitting Indian style with his hands on his knees and his head hanging low as he tried to gather his breath. The young man was breathing so hard he was heaving. Both of his hands and forearms were covered in blood and scratch marks. The top of this young man's shirt, his neck, and the right side of his cheek were covered in blood. A bloody knife lay on the floor a few inches in front of the man. The tip of the knife had broken off at an angle. The coroner later found the missing piece of the knife lodged in the dead woman's sternum. It was determined that the girlfriend had been stabbed a total of 27 times. The killer did not seem to have the energy or inclination to fight, and the fact that he reported it himself to the police meant that he seemed ready to take responsibility for his actions. Nonetheless, Randy and my dad kept their guns drawn because a man willing to stab someone to death was not to be taken lightly. My father asked the young man to put his hands behind his head, and to my father's relief, the young man complied, though he seemed to have a hard time mustering enough energy to lift his arms. The killer's head was still down as my dad walked over to cuff him. His body was still heaving, and my dad wondered if the young man might be keeping his head down because he was crying. After all, he reported his crime to the police, so it was possible that the young man was being overwhelmed by the gravity of his actions. My dad cuffed one hand and then the other, and the killer seemed to be peacefully surrendering. As my dad squatted down so that he could help lift the killer to his feet, the young man finally turned to face my dad. There was a glee in the killer's eyes, and my dad realized that the young man was not sobbing. He was giggling. The young man smiled at my father, and with a scratchy voice he simply said, "Well, that's done." My dad said at that moment he finally understood that expression about blood running cold. He felt every hair on his body prickle. When my dad and Randy brought the killer into the police station, everyone they passed by, from the veteran police officers to perps with a mile-long rap sheet, looked with shock and horror at the blood-soaked young man. The young man smiled and greeted everyone he saw with a, "How do you do?" or "Good morning," as he walked by. The young man pled guilty and showed no emotion during his interrogation, arraignment, or sentencing. If my dad were alive today, he would tell you that most of the criminals he encountered while he was a police officer were poor, desperate, and products of broken homes. But the young man that he encountered on that late summer night in 1981 was the embodiment of evil. I was almost killed at a house party. This all just happened a few days ago. I need to get this out and hope in the least it can save someone from what I went through. I was invited to a house party with a friend I've had for over 15 years but haven't spent time with in over 5, and some new people. A bit of an older crowd, but it sounded like it would be fun. The first hour was pretty normal. People playing darts and pool, passing drinks around, listening to music, and having a good time. After about an hour, one of the men at the party noticed I hadn't had a drink yet. He went behind a door where they had a small fridge and pulled out a beer for me, and then he opened it while still behind the door. Instead of being a smart woman and asking for one I opened myself, I just figured I was in good company, with at least 2 people I'd known for a long time, and they wouldn't let anything bad happen to me. God, was I so wrong. A few sips into this beer, I felt pretty woozy. So I set it down, and immediately everyone was asking me to have more, to have another, to chug it, including this person I'd known since we were kids. I knew that things were very, very wrong. I leaned up against a counter and checked my surroundings. Where's my closest exit if I leave? How quickly can I get home? It's only a 10-kilometer walk. Good Lord, 2 huge dogs are sleeping at the entrance we came in. I went for my coat. It was on a chair in front of me. They noticed, and one man started asking where I thought I was going. I replied with, "Oh, just for a cigarette." Everyone else was smoking inside. They knew it wasn't that bad, but I played it off as just needing some fresh air. One of the partygoers came up behind me and elbowed me across the back of the head. I moved fast. As I got my hand on my coat, someone ordered the dogs to get me. Within the blink of an eye, these 2 huge bull mastiffs are up and bolting towards me, barking like I'd never heard before. I dropped my big coat to move fast and made it to the back door just in time for them to slam into it from behind. I hear everyone inside laughing about it. It was cold, like below zero cold, and I was locked outside in some random dude's backyard without having my phone, my coat, nothing. About 30 minutes went by and the dogs finally stopped barking. A woman came outside to get me. She apologized ferociously, told me she locked up the dogs in another room and said that she'd get me home immediately. With her arm around me shaking, we walked back in. She said, "These guys are assholes. I'm so sorry. I won't let anything else happen." I knew in the very least if I could get my coat, I'd have my knife and my phone to call for help or even just push the button for emergency that notifies my husband and mom. When we went in, my friend asked what happened. She thought I had left and forgot my jacket. Yeah, okay. It made sense to me in the moment. Her husband offered to drive me home. I knew them, or I thought I did. Scared as hell, I took them up on the offer. I didn't know this other woman at all, and low-key thought she may have been in on this. I was wrong again. We started driving to my house and drove right past it. Guys, that was my house. Did you forget? They knew where it was. Oh no, I really want you to see my house. We're moving soon and you haven't seen it yet. Just a quick tour, then we'll take you home, my old friend said. At this point, I didn't think anything bad would happen. I used to trust her, and her partner. So I agreed to go in, but just for a few minutes. We went inside to a sunroom, and I noticed yet another large dog parked in the front of the door just inside. He didn't make a sound. Once inside the actual house, things got worse to the point where I thought I was in a damn Hunger Games or some shit. I was immediately grabbed and slammed into a wall head first. Someone punched me from behind and pulled my hair. She started screaming, "You won't survive tonight, bitch! I saw you touch my husband! Tonight you fucking die!" And flashed a large knife. I had no idea what she was on about. I was never near him and am married myself. I managed to push the emergency button on my phone. 3 times on the power button to send 3 pictures, exact location, photos from the front and rear facing cameras, and 3-minute voice clip to my husband and my mother. I knew that if I was going to get killed, at least they'd know what happened and to get these people. Someone kept hitting me, slamming my face into a wall. I already still felt really off from that drink they gave me and wasn't as quick as I usually am, but I managed to get away. I swung around and ran right to the door we came in, where the other dog was. I ran outside, making sure the door was closed behind me. I threw my boots on faster than the flash and took off running up the 2-kilometer driveway. Why? Why did I choose to move to the country? The nearest house to me was literally mine. I just ran, scared as hell, and didn't look back. The driveway was full of ice, dark, and I could hear screaming behind me. Then the dog barking viciously behind me. I ran faster, figured I'd kill myself with cardio before getting eaten by a snarling dog. She sent him after me, with an order to kill. I made it to the end of the driveway, praying that someone would be driving by on the road. Nothing. So I just kept running. It was after 3 a.m. by now. By the time I made it to my house, my legs were about to give out from underneath me and my heart rate was over 130 beats per minute. But I couldn't hear the dog anymore. I couldn't hear anyone screaming. My husband was out of town for a Christmas event with his daughter. He called me just as I was getting inside my house, finally, and said the police were on their way. About 25 minutes went by and it was silent outside. I peeked out for a much-needed cigarette, still on the phone with him, and discovered 4 unidentifiable people standing across from me in the dark of my driveway. They were whistling like Negan does in The Walking Dead. One said, little pig, we said you had to die tonight." But I didn't recognize the voice. I tossed my still-lit cigarette and bolted inside. I locked and barricaded the door of my basement apartment. The police took over an hour to arrive. By the time they did, everyone was gone. By 5:30, I still hadn't slept yet, was badly injured from the events that took place, and still shakingly afraid. I was checked over. Nothing broken, just bruised and sore. They took my statement, and nothing has happened to them, yet. They still live around me. I fear that one of them lives right upstairs in my home. What's the lesson here? Every time I hear a scary narration on this channel, especially the real-life I almost died stories, I try to take something away from them. This, I trusted too easily. I had an emergency measure in place to contact my loved ones because I'm deathly allergic to bee stings and I can't speak if I'm stung. That didn't save my life, though. Had they decided to try to break into my house, they could have, and I don't think I would have survived that night. I'm scared to leave my house. I have nowhere else to run to. Whether they were hazing me or actually wanted me dead the other night, I hope to never find out. I hope it's all over. I hope I can find a new place sooner than later. I hope anyone who hears this story trusts their instincts and gut feelings more than I did that night. If something feels off, it probably is. I fought through anxiety for so long that I tend to ignore it when I have a bad feeling because I got so used to it just being an irrational fear. Never again. Stay safe, everyone. My roommate and I were living on campus, but decided we would rather start looking into renting a small, cheap home for us to transfer into. We knew we wanted to live near campus, so the commute wasn't hell. Living in a rural area was bad enough, and our college campus was mainly forest surrounding it. Luckily, we had cafes and stores within the campus since the school is basically situated as its own college town. This town is literally made for us, the college students, my roommate Faith whispered to herself while skimming websites for available housing nearby. There aren't many options around here if we're looking to rent a house, she continued while turning over to me. I walked over and peered at her laptop. I started skimming pages as well and finally stumbled upon a place available about 3 miles down the road. Interesting, I said. This place has 2 bedrooms, a bathroom, and a backyard. Guess how much? Faith mumbled sarcastically. Too much for us. Nope. Apparently this leasing office is offering this rental for only $500 a month. Insane. Is this a prank? We pay double that on campus, and this guy who posted the offer, James, claims the utilities and such are included. Faith choked on her coffee and spit half of it out. Are you kidding me, Erin? I know we live in the middle of nowhere, but $500 for a 2-bedroom, 1-bath house? That doesn't sound right whatsoever. Like you said, we're paying $1,000 for ours on campus, and it's smaller. She was right. Something was off, and this offer seemed too good to be true. On top of that, the offer was on Craigslist, which is known to be sketchy at times. Even without the Craigslist element, this guy's post was off as well. There was only one photo of the home, and although it seemed fine and put together, this photo didn't tell us much about the surroundings or the inside. Let's text him. His number's right here. Faith started dialing the numbers on her phone. The man replied relatively quickly. I asked him if this is a joke because it's way too good to be true. Haha. I rolled my eyes at her and laughed, but her face suddenly turned blank. He doesn't have a sense of humor, but he said to come by. He gave the address and directions. Here. I grabbed her phone and saw that he replied with, "It's real. If you're interested, come by to view. The home is at 277 Fort Mill Road. I wasn't all that familiar with the area, as we both just started attending university and transferred from Ohio to Utah. I wasn't a moron, though. I'd be able to find it. We hopped in my car and started Google Maps. It again was very close, only 3 miles south of us. As we got closer, we noticed the map on our phone showed mainly shrubbery and forest ahead. We automatically knew we were heading into a deserted area of some sort. Isolated towns and villages have always spooked me, but heading into one was making me extremely anxious in that moment. I could tell Faith saw the emotion on my face. "You good? I know you watch a lot of horror movies, especially lately. Don't worry." She smirked and then told me that her map seemed to show that the only grocery store was still on campus, as well as any type of shopping in general. I sighed. Well, I guess we'll be doing some traveling with shopping. No more rolling out of bed and walking over to Starbucks. She laughed and shrugged her shoulders. We were a few moments away from the road. We started pulling up and noticed that the entire block was the only area nearby covered in some type of sand or dirt. Basically a dirt road. Everything surrounding the homes on this one block was covered in greenery and trees. It almost looked like these houses were planted on an abandoned baseball field. We got out of the car and texted James that we arrived. He told us earlier that he would meet us there, but I honestly didn't expect this. This looks like an isolated mini ghost town. Does anyone know of this road? This map is showing that we're the only ones out here. Our house and 3 others next to it. Does he live in one of them? I don't know, Faith, I snapped. I was getting more anxious as I waited for him to arrive so I could ask him what the hell was up with this whole area. We seemed to be in the middle of nowhere. Just as my thoughts were spinning out of control, I heard some rocks tumble. I turned around and saw a man walking towards us with rain boots on as he shuffled along the path of rocks and sand. May I add, the lawns on the property were non-existent. The homes had more large patches of rocks and dirt in the front yard where the grass would have been. "Hello there. I'm James." James spoke with a low voice and looked to be in his mid-40s. He was wearing a somewhat dirty hoodie covering most of his head and face. He shook our hands as we reluctantly accepted, and I immediately threw my questions at him. "Girls, I'm a busy man. It's a great deal for college students in the area as a cheap price and convenient location. Privacy and peace are all you'll get out here. Nice change, huh? I just rented out this home and I'm currently offering it for $500, as listed. The other 3 on Fort Mill Road are inhabited by families at the moment. If one leaves, I'll be offering to any college students interested as well. Let your friends know." Everything he told us made sense, I suppose. I wanted to ask why the road was so isolated from everyone else in town, as well as why there were only 4 houses on the road in total. I was slightly scared to ask any more questions beyond the basics of moving in or price. He seemed to be rushing us, but the truth is, Faith and I were desperate to leave our dorm. It was small, stuffy, and noisy at night when some students above us would throw frequent parties. This seemed like the perfect solution and opportunity for us. I turned to Faith, who seemed speechless. "Do you want to do this?" She turned to the house, which was basic. Cream interior, brown roofing, small home, nothing special. "Let's see inside first," Faith demanded. I stared her down, signaling her to chill out. James immediately headed towards the house that was for sale and motioned us over. "Come on, girls, I need to be leaving soon. I have much work to do. It's getting late." We followed this stranger toward the house as we looked at each other in confusion. Still, we followed him. As we walked inside the door, everything seemed normal. It was quiet and smelled like a new home, though the air had a heavy odor of sawdust and dirt. It must have been from the foundation or outside of the home. I wonder how old these homes were, but I wasn't about to ask any more questions and ruin this opportunity. James seems like the type of guy who wasn't okay with wasting time or bullshitting. "Here we are." He waved us inside. There was a kitchen attached to a small living room, bathroom, and our 2 bedrooms. It was so normal it almost diminished any anxiety I had been holding inside. Seems good. Water's working? Electricity? I asked James. Yep. I must tell you that issues may arise, but nothing serious. If any power or water issues occur, you can reach me, and I'll work on it as soon as possible. This side of town has relatively frequent blackouts because of the storms in the summer. Anyway, deposit's $250, and you may submit rent to me on the last Friday of every month. Faith and I were getting tired and honestly wanted to just go home and sleep. We agreed that we wanted to go for it. Okay, I have cash for a deposit. Do you? Faith asked. I grabbed cash out of my wallet and counted as Faith reached into hers and took out cash. We split it and handed the money to James. Thanks, ladies. When will you be wanting to move in? Faith and I told him that the morning after would be fine. We needed to still gather our belongings and alert campus of our decision to transfer to a new residence. The next morning, we were ready to move in. Being college students, we didn't really have much anyway, so it was pretty easy. When moving in, I couldn't help but notice again how odd it was that there were only 4 homes, including ours, resided on the block. I peered into the other 3 homes, which looked identical to ours. I can't lie, these homes looked super cheap. Not ancient, not brand new, but also not at all a good investment. The homes all had blinds that were covering all of the windows of the homes, so it was impossible to see inside. I was extremely curious. Don't you find it weird? I feel like we're all alone out here. Our neighbors aren't even visible, and where are their cars? Faith contemplated. I also felt uneasy when noticing that. Why didn't they have cars? Even 1 car outside of each home would be normal. He said there were families in them. They were inhabited. Weird word to use in this context, if you ask me. Let's just set everything up, I said as I carried our bags inside. Faith took some more and then parked our car on the side of the home. We were going to have a guy come out there and set up the cable and Wi-Fi, but we received a call from him out of nowhere. Hey, Erin, this is Doug from Spectrum. You had an appointment with us tonight, but I see you live in the Fort Mill area. I paused for a moment, confused. Yes, Fort Mill Road. Is there an issue? He paused as well. Issue isn't the word, I guess. The thing is, setting up Wi-Fi and cable out there will be tricky. I never have any luck lately because of how shoddy the connection and power tends to be near there. The signal isn't strong at all. Do you want me to still try? It might be useless to attempt. I didn't know what to say. It was weird, but we did live in a rural town. I didn't expect this issue, though, with the home. It's okay, let's try it out, and if it's still shoddy, we can live with it. Some TV here and some there, some signal to complete my homework will suffice for now. Deep inside, though, I was aggravated because I didn't want to run into issues now with power or doing my schoolwork. I realized we may need to travel more than expected to campus. Now we needed to make trips for food, shopping in general, and Wi-Fi connection. At this point, I was too tired to care. The man showed up and set everything up, and as I watched him leave, I noticed the sun setting and the lights illuminating the inside of the homes on the block. Every home glowed with light from behind the curtains, seeming to be instantaneous. It was very odd and startling at best. Faith walked up behind me, scaring me. You saw that too? She peered at the homes and squinted for a while. I can't see shit inside. It was true. You couldn't see a thing. The blinds were so thick and every window of the home just sat there aglow. I just don't get it. I haven't seen anyone ever walk from inside or outside of the homes. There's still no cars outside. Should we ask James? Faith nervously asked. I kept looking up and down the road. It was starting to bother me more and more. It was just sketchy enough to pique my curiosity again. I'm calling James about this power issue and asking him why our neighbors are so odd, Faith blurted out as she ran over to the couch. We sat in silence there as Faith texted James. I'm just waiting to see what he has to say. It's still early. We can always back out of this arrangement. My mind was racing. I wanted a cheap house. I also wanted privacy and peace. Isn't that what we signed up for here? Why was I suddenly so worried about this situation? A loud noise came from the other side of the room. It was Faith's phone. A text from James. She read it aloud. Your neighbors signed up for some privacy as well. Try not to be so nosy and let them be. As far as the power and Wi-Fi, I alerted you to this and you accepted. I looked at Faith with confusion. He was being so rude and blunt with us. It's almost as if he was telling us to shut up and accept it because we were stuck with it. I didn't like this. I had an overwhelming feeling. Nausea. I truly felt something wasn't right. This whole situation had been so sketchy from the start and so unofficial. This guy's professionalism and help was almost non-existent, and he didn't seem to be who he said he was. What kind of leasing officer would act this way? I think we need to leave. This is a joke. I don't even feel safe with this guy as our supposed landlord, Faith mumbled. I agreed, but didn't want to make any decisions until tomorrow morning. I turned to Faith and sleepily said, Let's get some rest and figure it out tomorrow. It's late. She shrugged and rolled over. I woke up early that morning to the sound of rain outside. It was extremely quiet out there, with all the sounds of rain hitting the roof being the only thing noticeable. I yawned and got up, still feeling out of it. As I waddled over to the kitchen to quickly make my coffee, I noticed my car window slightly open as I peered out the kitchen window. What the hell? I walked outside and looked into the back seat. My backpack was gone. I had my laptop and textbooks in there, as well as my wallet. I have no idea why I left my wallet in the car, but I did. I felt like an idiot. At that moment, I was livid and had enough of this. I called the cops. I waited outside the house in the rain. As Faith came outside after waking up, she hugged me. Are you okay? I turned to her. No? I called the cops. I'm telling them what's going on. Someone stole my backpack from my car. I left my window open. I also left my wallet in there. She looked stunned. What did you leave in your wallet? Cancel your cards if you left them in there. I hope you didn't have too much cash in it. I did. I left $450 in change, as well as all my cards. I hopped on my phone and got ready to request cancellation of all of them. As soon as I signed into my APP, my bank alerted me of fraudulent activities that had occurred moments before. I looked down at my phone, feeling lightheaded. This guy had been using my credit and debit card to buy artillery and went on a Walmart spree, totaling thousands of dollars in a matter of 2 hours. What the hell was going on? The cops showed up moments later, and as a female officer stepped out, I ran toward her. Officer, thank you for coming so fast, I said as I ran out of breath. I've had some valuables stolen, and I'd like to talk to you about the situation here. She listened as I explained our predicament, and as I tried to finish, she cut me off. I hadn't even told her about the living arrangement yet. Erin, thank you for reporting this. There has been an ongoing investigation of this area. Fort Mill Road has been on the watch for almost a year now, showing frequent criminal activity within the last few months. I was confused. She continued, There have been 7 reports of burglary alone in this tight area, mostly dealing with cars being broken into down the road where the nature park is. Again, Faith and I didn't know much about the area since we were transfer students. I had no idea a nature park was nearby at all, let alone anything else. Officer, we just recently moved into this home. We're renting it from a man named James who claims to be renting out these other homes to college kids who need cheap housing. Do you know what's going on with our other neighbors? The officer looked at me like I had spoken gibberish. You're renting this house? From who? Ladies, these homes have been abandoned. We figured whoever this James person is, he's at the center of it. I frantically looked towards the homes. I remembered how Faith and I saw lights glowing from within the last night. They were inhabited, as James put it. Families were supposed to be renting them out as well. I looked over at the officer. But we both saw those homes lit up inside last night. People had to be in them. I'm not going crazy. Faith turned to me. That's why we didn't see any cars. We didn't even see people leave or enter. I knew something was wrong here, Erin. We didn't check everything out. I knew she was right. I was suspicious the entire time, but was afraid to speak up and bother this guy. This whole scenario was set up and planned out so perfectly that you wouldn't think it was strange. We saw some weird stuff, but decided it wasn't enough to scare us away. I'm helping you ladies take your belongings to the car. We need to get you out of this area. This isn't safe and barely a suitable place for anyone to live, let alone 2 young college students. We'll document this in a report and investigate Fort Mill immediately. My stomach was sick. I couldn't believe that this guy fooled us. How? I was just thankful we ended it there on day 2. If we stayed any longer, I'm honestly not sure what would have occurred that night. We drove home, and later that night we received a call from Officer Daltrey, who had helped us that morning. Hello, Erin. Are you both doing all right? I told her that we were okay, but asked her if she had any updates on Fort Mill. She paused. Well, we do. I want to be the first to say that I'm so glad you called when you did. I suddenly felt sick again. What was she about to tell me? She continued, We have new information on the situation. James Riviera was the gentleman who claimed to have rented out the house to you. We caught him later this afternoon and we were able to retrieve your belongings, except for the wallet. I'm sure you've notified your bank and credit providers. I felt so down and stupid for falling into his trap. Faith looked ashamed but relieved. We have also found out what was going on with those homes on Fort Mill Road. I gulped. Ladies, Mr. Riviera was not only burglarizing cars and homes, but also scamming college students by luring them into abandoned homes. He's been claiming they're for rent and usable because he knew the water was running inside at the moment and somehow connected a power source to these homes. We're trying to find out where he's living, as we're finding power lines on the side of the homes, with some running under the soil. Our teams managed to shut down his Craigslist account and post. I was stunned. I had no words and neither did Faith. We just looked at each other. The officer continued. You're both safe now, and that's what matters. I'm not sure what else Mr. Riviera had planned, but he seemed to have just started this Craigslist scam recently, possibly 2 months ago. Please be more cautious next time, girls. We're alerting the campus so officials can take any needed steps to protect the students. Faith took the phone from me. Did you ever find out what was going on in those homes across from us? Officer Daltrey's tone changed as she spoke. Yeah, the other homes were abandoned and Mr. Riviera had them hooked up somehow on a timer daily. Realistic, huh? Our police have been investigating for months and we hadn't seen this. Mr. Riviera had the homes synchronized to appear lit at dusk. As soon as sunset came around, the homes were programmed to light up inside every night. He fooled people having those homes look occupied. Evil genius, really, she sarcastically finished. I felt exhausted, even from just hearing this whole psychotic situation spelled out for us. Inhabited, I mumbled to myself. I remember him using that stupid word. I should have known he was crazy. Who talks like that? It's just how it is, ladies. Criminals prey on unsuspecting people. Unfortunately for college kids, they're well aware of your nature. You kids tend to be more gullible and they know that. Top it off with the need for cheap housing and they found a match. She was spot on. The thing is, we felt safe in this new rural town we called our home during college. We didn't feel scared. I don't know why, but sometimes we become too trusting of strangers in certain contexts. I suspected people out here were the epitome of small town inviting and generous, perhaps even warm and friendly by nature. We had signs, but we ignored them. As a warning, make it a priority to check everything out before determining your next move. As a college student, I learned the hard way, and I hope no one makes a mistake like this anymore. One of the scariest experiences I've had as an EMT occurred during my first year on the job. We received a 911 call for a person down in the front yard of a residential address at approximately 8:30 a.m. When we got there, we noticed a woman lying face down in the front yard near a large tree. I went to grab the heart monitor as the paramedic and another firefighter were making their way to the woman. As I walked toward them, I noticed an older male open the front door of the house and walk out onto the open-air porch. I started walking towards him because I could see he had something on his face, which I thought might be blood. I got to the walkway leading to the steps of the porch, and I immediately stopped walking. The man, who appeared to be in his upper 60s, had severe trauma and bleeding to his lower face and jaw area. He had no shirt on, and he was trying to say something I couldn't understand. He was also holding something silver down by his side, in his right hand. I thought it was a knife at first, and I immediately told him to put the knife down. He was agitated and continued trying to yell. He turned to walk back into the house and then walked right back out. As I tried to focus in on his silver knife in his hand, I heard my captain yell, "Get behind the truck, he's shooting! Get back!" We all jumped up and ran behind the engine. I hadn't heard a gunshot or seen a gun. Then it dawned on me. It wasn't a knife, it was a gun. The police had been dispatched to the initial call as well and were just pulling up. They began interacting with the man from a distance as he still had the weapon in his hand. He was not raising it or pointing it. My partner and I ran to the woman. I attached the monitor. He looked at it and said, "Aziztol," and began quickly moving her. We transported her, CPR in progress, to the nearest trauma center. Unfortunately, she did not survive. The man ended up going back in his house and barricading himself inside. The SWAT team and negotiators had to come out, and the whole ordeal took several hours. We later found out more of the story. The older man had shot his wife in the back as she was running away from him. He then put the gun under his chin and pulled the trigger, but not before he flinched ever so slightly. The bullet entered under his chin and exited near his nose. This was the cause of the severe facial trauma and agitation. I don't remember ever hearing if they found the motive or not. If you're confused about why my captain said he was shooting, I was too at the time. But what happened was that my captain, who rides in the passenger seat of the fire truck, got out of the rig and was facing the opposite side of the street. There were neighbors outside who heard and saw this man shooting, and they told him this. So naturally, walking up and seeing everything, he made the right decision to pull us all back because we had no idea. From the time we arrived on the scene to loading the patient in the ambulance was probably 5 minutes max. It wasn't really scary at the time. It was afterwards when it set in. The realization I was standing directly in front of a deranged man with a revolver in his hand, who obviously wasn't afraid to use it, was pretty eye-opening. And to get to that point from an initial dispatch for a person down in a yard at 8:30 in the morning, we get those calls daily and they're nothing major. In this case, we ended up in the middle of a murder-suicide gone wrong. I got the ever-loving shit beat out of me by a teensy 13-year-old girl. I was on rotation for ambulance duty and the plectron goes off at 2 in the morning or so. The fact it was a plectrum may tell you it was a while ago. If you've ever seen Emergency, you've heard the tones when their station gets a call. Anyway, not much information on the radio. Not a big surprise. I got to the station and heard that the police were there. Also, no surprise. It's 2 a.m. in the Valley View. You didn't have to do a lot. My partner was new. I had a couple of years' experience at that point, so he was going to drive. I was medically trained, so I take the back. At this point, I'm 2 years out of high school, a big-ass strapping guy. My partner was half my size. We get to the scene. Mom and Dad meet us and tell us that their daughter got home late and she's not right. Huh. Well, let's look at her. She's slow. Just slow. Pupil response, breathing, reactions, heartbeat. Slow. Nothing obviously wrong with her other than that. But at the time, one of the things to do was put pills in a bowl. So did your guests. Then you grab something and you try it. Stupid, but I suspected she got into something depressing her. All I know for sure is that she's making me nervous and I want her in my ambulance. We load her up and I take the back. She's not responding verbally, but she does freak me out. I start her on oxygen and told the driver to go. The cop would escort. We're moving and I get on the radio to CMED to tell them what I've got and what we're doing. The radio is in a small recess above her head. I reach for the radio and she goes batshit crazy. Thrashing, screaming, biting, scratching, fighting. I'm way bigger than she is and I'm trying to get her in restraints. I'm trying not to hurt her. She's trying to kill me. Seriously. I was terrified. I screamed at my driver to get on the radio, get the cop back here, pull off and help me. We do that, she puts up a battle, but we restrained her and hauled ass. By the time we got to the ER, she was a scared little girl crying for mom, not a homicidal little demon bent on death. I walked in and the nurses began to look at me. I was dripping blood from my face and my damn right armpit, where she had bitten me deeply enough to need stitches while I was reaching over for the radio. I will never, ever forget that night. I don't know what her problem was, but she scared the hell out of me. For me, it was the first patient that died. She was about 50 and attending an event at a hotel ballroom. She was dancing on the floor and just dropped unconscious. When I arrived, people on the scene were already doing CPR. This was the first time I did CPR on an actual person. The floor was fairly slick and my knees slid out from under me for the first few times I tried to do chest compressions. We did CPR, defibrillated her, and inserted a comi tube. I remembered having trouble cutting through the underwire of her bra. In the movies, CPR patients always make it. At the last minute, just when it seems all hope is lost, they wake up and start breathing again. Not so for this lady. After the third time shocking her, it started to become apparent that she would not be coming back. We kept working on her for 40 minutes, but she never tried to breathe on her own. She never regained a pulse. She never showed any signs whatsoever. After the run was over, I got pretty hard on myself. I kept remembering falling down when trying to give compressions. Were my compressions deep enough? Fast enough? Did I screw this up and cause her to die? In the midst of all these other people reviewed the case and were asking me questions as well. I got paranoid. I thought the hotel would want a scapegoat if they got sued. I felt certain the company was trying to do the same thing. Hang me out to dry if a lawsuit should come. In the end, it took me a while to accept that I had done everything I could for her. It was just her time. Even at what is still a fairly young age, people can die. As a nurse in the ICU at the hospital I worked at around the year 2008, I had a patient who was a frequent patient to our unit, so I was familiar with his case. He was about 6 feet tall, with a shock of red hair. He was a young adult who had been fired from his job with EMS several months earlier after dropping a patient on his first day on the job. Ironically, in our unit while delivering a morbidly obese patient who was subsequently injured. This young man became very despondent, and I laid in his bed at his mother's house in one spot until he developed a very large open necrotic area on his hip. through the muscle tissue extending down his hip and into his groin. He was about 115 pounds, very underweight, a diabetic and a skeleton who dreaded the painful dressing changes that had to be done every 6 hours. His mother rarely left his side and performed his care at home when he was well enough at times to leave. Several of us nurses had eerie feelings about his mother. We documented some strange events. This patient had been receiving high-caloric feedings 24 hours a day to strengthen his body. His blood sugar levels measured every 2 hours and the appropriate amount of insulin given to him. He ate very little food and his sugar levels were remaining steady. However, at least once a week he could go into seizures, he would stop breathing, or he would code. Per protocol, we would check his blood sugar and it would be near zero, even though we had just checked it and gave him the appropriate amount of insulin. He would always be in his room with his mother every single time this happened. She was at times seen putting something away just prior to her calling out for help each time this occurred. We called Adult Protective Services several times in an attempt to save this young man. Each time their investigation yielded nothing as the son denied that his mother would be trying to kill him. However, he wanted to die, but would deny it to APS. Finally, his mother had him transferred to another hospital in our area. I saw in the newspaper shortly after that he died. One of our nurses also worked at this other hospital. He had died the exact same way. There was nothing we could do to save this young man. It's haunted me all this time. First of all, I'm an X-ray tech, not a doctor or a nurse. I worked at a U.S. Army hospital stateside. I was working a night shift and got a call that they needed to bring down a floor patient for some neck imaging. So they bring down this young guy, no older than 20, who's able to stand and talk and is very mobile. I'm curious, other than the young man being seemingly moody, nothing seemed wrong. So I start the typical questioning for military patients. What do you do for the Army? How long have you been in? Got any future plans? After only asking my first question, I saw he had been shot through the neck. The bullet had fragmented inside his neck and he had about 10 to 15 tiny pieces of bullet throughout his neck. He had a clear entrance and exit wound. The answer to my first and last question to him that night was he was an infantryman in the Rangers. After my patient left, I could not stop thinking about this poor kid. Not even old enough to buy a beer or a handgun. Got sent out to some third world hellhole and got shot through the neck. I couldn't get over the sheer horror he must have felt. He must have known he was going to die that day. After getting shot, seeing the blood spilling from his uniform, seeing his friends' faces, seeing the medic's face, all the assuring that he was fine with the panic in their voices, and all this for a little more than $2,000 a month in college money he was never going to use. And at some point, I imagine he started to wonder why he hadn't died yet. And then he just never did. He lived. Now he survived a war most people think is over and ending, and will get medically retired and have to live with his traumatic experience for the rest of his life. I don't think I will ever forget this soldier. I can't imagine the damage that happened to him mentally and physically, and how it will impact the rest of his life. My heart breaks for him, and I wish I could have helped him more. This young couple came back from their honeymoon late night from New Zealand. This young lady had gone for a bath at around 5:30 in the morning. Around 7:30 a.m. the husband woke up and searched for her, and they realized she was in the bathroom with the gas geyser on. They broke the door and found her on the floor with an altered sensorium. She suffered from carbon monoxide poisoning because of the gas geyser, and MRI is showing bilateral white matter changes because of the hypoxic ischemic encephalopathy. These are technical terms, which means there is severe brain damage because of lack of oxygen supply to the brain. Now she is suffering from profound memory loss, and because of brain damage, instead of 27, her behavior is like a 7-year-old. P.S. Gas geyser poisoning is emerging nowadays. Please be careful while using it at home. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to leave a like, subscribe, share it, all that good stuff. And if you want to help support what I do, debate on becoming a channel member or even a patron. You can become a patron for as little as $1 a month. I hope you are having a wonderful day, and I really do appreciate you taking the time to listen to this video. And I will catch you in the next one. And just remember, it's always scarier if it's true. Bad bye.